These 3 things you need to know before buying a 911 in 2023. Prices are still falling since the market top of last summer. This does not, or at least to a lesser extent, apply to the 996s, and there is no reason to panic. Welcome to a new market update for the 911 Carrera. Every 3 months I will update you on the latest developments in the price trends and depreciation patterns. If you've been following these updates, you know that prices stopped during the summer after a strong run-up in the pandemic, and that they have been decreasing during the last 9 months or so. This is still the prevailing picture, but we'll first have a look at the market that we will cover before looking at the latest developments in the price trends. We'll namely specifically look at the US market and the 911 Carrera models. Over here we can see all the prices for the base, S, GTS and T models in February 2022. In total there were 1,334 cars for sale and they had a median price of $100,000. Now we won't go too much into the details over here, but let's cover some peculiarities of this market. We can see, for example, that the price difference between the 996.1 and 996.2 generation is not too large, while there's an insane price gap between the 997.2 and 997.1. The reason for the latter gap is obvious. The 997.2 is often labeled as the best modern 911. It offers a great blend between modern features such as PDK and old-school hydraulic steering. In fact, prices of the latest 997s are on par with the older 991s, and this highlights the popularity of the 997.2 generation. The next significant price increase only happens when we jump to the 991.2 generation. The median price crosses $100,000 in that generation. The 992 of course sits at the top of the food chain, and prices for the most recent examples cross $200,000. Yet, as we'll see soon, depreciation also kicked in for this generation. In fact, this segment features some of the biggest drops. And that's a nice bridge to the next subject, the falling prices. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, prices are decreasing for basically all generations, with exception of the 996. So let's have a look at those decreasing price trends and the latest developments. Over here we have the price trends for the 997.1, Carrera 2 base and S models. You can see that the short-term price trend is down. Compared to the market top of May 2022, prices are down by 11% in both markets. The year-over-year price decrease though is still relatively moderate at 6.5%. Compared to the prices in April 2020, there's nothing to worry. Prices are still up by 30% in the base market and by 35% in the S market. Moving on to the 997.2 market, we can see that the price decreases are slightly smaller. Compared to May 2022, prices are down by 9% in the base and S market and by 21% in the GTS market. The latter decrease is extreme, but this mainly results from the last 3 months in which the market composition changed. So this number is a significant overestimation. Now when it comes to the price change during last year, the picture is not so clear. Base prices are up by 4%, while S's and GTS's are down by 13%. And this price difference between the base and S market results from the difference in the price dynamics. S prices increased much more during the pandemic. You can see that the gap between the green and the blue line increased over time. So the larger decrease in the S market during the most recent period means that the price relationship between the two models is back to where it was in 2022. And with that we move on to the 991.1 market. Looking immediately at the year-over-year price decrease, we can see that prices are down by 8% in the base market, by 4% in the GTS market and by 5.9% in the S market. So in monetary terms, these percentages equal drops of $6, $4.4 and $5,000. These numbers are in line with the rest of the market. What is different though is the long-term price increase. Compared to the end of 2019, prices are up by 11% in the base market and by 4% in the S market. This is a relatively small increase when you compare it to the generations we just covered, and also when you compare it to other cars. Moving on to the 991.2, we can quickly see that the situation is a bit different over here. I am not sure if you noticed, but some price trends in the earlier graphs showed premature signs of flattening. That is, the decrease rate decreased slightly, or the trend in the confidence intervals flattened. But none of that we can see in the 991.2 market. What we can see is that with exception of the T market, because supply is low over there, all trends are clearly pointing down. Nothing in these price trends indicates that the bottom is near. The decrease rates themselves though are slightly higher than in other generations, but the difference is only small. Compared to last year, prices decreased by 11% in the base market, by 7% in the GTS market and by 10% in the S market. So in monetary terms, the base market lost the most, as prices are down by approximately $14,000. The T market is a bit of a special case. Since August 21, supply has been decreasing. It went from 20 to 11 cars. And this makes the Carrera T a rare car. The year-over-year price change is then also the lowest. Prices decreased by 7% or $7.6 thousand. Similar to the other newer generations, prices are closing in to pre-pandemic levels. Base models are only up by 4% and S models by 5%. And we'll discuss later in the video why this isn't so strange. Right now we'll have a look at the latest 911 generation, the 992. We can see that the scarcity level was high during 2021, as prices increased directly after the introduction of the 992. But 2022 highlights that this is not a car with a limited production run. As supply climbed, the price trend started to flatten and eventually turned down. Compared to last year, prices are down by 6% in the base market and by 8% in the S market. And these drops equal respectively $8,000 and $12,000. Just as for the 991.2 generation, there are no bottoming signs in these price trends. Everything is pointing towards a continuation of the decrease. However, this aggregate price trend is slightly misleading. And the reason for this is that there are still many relatively low mileage cars added to the market. And these of course keep the aggregate prices high. The price trend per model year gives a more accurate overview of the current situation. Over here we can see that, as one could expect, depreciation rates are much higher for the new cars than for the older cars. A 2022 base car lost 8% during last year, while a 2022 car lost 13%. 2021 S's sit somewhere in the middle with 11%. Depreciation rates for 2022 S's and GTS's appear to be extremely high at 16 to 21%, but the samples for the first data points are relatively small. Yet, we can see from the slopes that the rates are indeed the highest in these segments. In monetary terms, some of these decreases are of course a bit daunting, especially for the newest cars, but I guess this is no surprise for people who ordered these brand new. Now after all of those downward sloping trends, it's time to have a look at the only segment for which prices are relatively stable. Exactly, the 996. It's the oldest car that we're covering, and therefore perhaps the least susceptible to the traditional depreciation effect that re-emerged after last summer. So let's have a look at the price trends for the 996. But before we do so, if you find this video helpful for your buying or selling process, or are just a little bit of a data geek like myself, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. If we start with the 996.1 generation, we can see that the price trend softened slightly, but is in general still quite strong. Compared to last year, the median price point is 0.4% lower, but this change is not statistically confirmed, so it might be the result of chance. It's also meaningless compared to the 50% increase since June 2020. If we look at the most recent development, we can see that the confidence intervals decreased a bit. This is then also the only sign of weakness in this market. I investigated this drop in detail and found out that it are mainly the low mileage cars that are responsible for this decrease. Prices in the top of this segment decreased quite drastically. Have a look at the following graph. Over here we can see the price development per mileage bucket. So this means that the blue line shows the price development for cars between 0 and roughly 48,000 miles. These trends are more volatile than the aggregate trend, as they are based on fewer cars, but we can clearly see that the cars with the lowest mileage increased the most during the pandemic, but also decreased the most. Price trends for all other mileages were relatively stable. Looking at the price trend for the 996.2s, we can see again that prices softened a bit, but much less than for the modern generations. Compared to last year, all models lost approximately 6%, and in monetary terms, the price decreases range between $1.8 and $3,000, numbers that are much more manageable than the ones in the latest generations. It are also again the low mileage cars that lost the most, especially when it comes to the 4S's. So we saw now that prices are still decreasing in most segments, and that there appears to be a weak correlation between the age of a car and the current depreciation rates. 996 prices were fairly flat, and depreciation rates were the highest in the 992 segment. Now I fully realize that this isn't a groundbreaking conclusion. New cars depreciate faster than older cars. But after all this craziness during the pandemic, there's no harm in pointing this out again. But what if you're an owner of a 911 Carrera and care about values? Is there a reason for panic? I don't think so. The pricing situation during the pandemic was exceptional, and now we are seeing that many cars are returning to their normal depreciation trajectory. Some other cars are depreciating at rates that are above normal, but I don't think that this goes for the majority of the 911 Carrera market. Year-over-year rates fluctuate between roughly 5 and 12%. 992 prices are coming down quicker, but again, this is the only new car in the analysis, so that makes sense. Now if you're a buyer and waiting for car prices to drop to pre-pandemic levels, I think you'll never find a car. We saw that some median prices are almost back at where it started, but there's a big difference between today's market and the pre-pandemic market. 991.1 base prices are, for example, only $3,500 higher than before the pandemic, but the mileage more than doubled. In December 2019, you could get a car with 12,000 miles for $86,500, while now you need to pay $90,000 for a car with 26,000 miles. So in other words, prices are slowly returning to where they were in some markets, but you are getting a car with a significant higher mileage. But what can we expect going forward? In my exotic car market update that I will publish next month, I will talk more in general about future prices, but I can already reveal that as of now, prices have been decreasing linearly, and that as of now, there are no signs that things would get significantly worse in the short term. On the contrary, some price trends show very early signs of flattening. Naturally, it helps that spring is around the corner, but more about this later. Now if you like this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would like to see the analysis for a different car, let's say a GT3 or a 458, head over to my channel. It's organized in playlists so that you can easily find the analysis you're looking for. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. And for all the people asking about a hurricane analysis, don't worry, it's coming. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.